Welcome to The Next Level, conversations that propel business. The next hour is all about the entrepreneur, why they start businesses, how they make their businesses grow, how they overcome failures and achieve success. Your hosts are Bob Gibbons, founder of Riata Commercial Realty, a commercial real estate advisory and tenant advocacy firm, and Stephen Nooner, founder and CEO of Alkali, a company with a unique process that helps businesses more effectively buy and manage their insurance programs. Bob and Stephen will ask probing questions to find impactful solutions that will help take your business to the next level. And now, here's Bob Gibbons and Stephen Nooner.
Welcome to The Next Level, conversations that propel business. I'm your host, Stephen Nooner.
And this is Bob Gibbons, and we're glad you're with us for another exciting episode of The Next Level, where we have a great guest who gives us all of their wisdom and makes us all smarter people.
And thankfully,
I'm not the guest.
Yeah.
So our guest this week is Kurt VandeMotter, and Kurt is an interesting guy because he not only has been in corporate and is now an entrepreneur and has done his own business, but he also is a public speaker. And most importantly, he helps all the rest of us find the right people to come into the company. So he's an executive search guy. His company is Linked Executive Search, and you can find him on the online at linkedexec.com. And Kurt, welcome to the show. Glad you're here.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I enjoy being here.
We like to start the show with wisdom of others, and you had a quote that you provided, and we're going to go with it. And it is, there is nothing permanent except change, and it's...
Go ahead, say that word.
Heraclitus?
Yes.
Heraclitus?
Yes. Yeah, so I think that is profound even more today than it was years ago. We are in an environment today that is just changing daily. Mm-hmm. And I think that, companies have to be able to keep up the pace in all avenues. And it's making executives become sharper every day because the technology is changing. But as the technology changes, the requirements on the whole organization, people and everything else modify and change as well.
So do you think that it makes them sharper or more numb? Like, I feel like almost like I talked to some execs, and the pace of the change is so much that they almost become numb to it. It's the not knowing which ones to seize upon and which ones are going to really drive the results.
Mm-hmm. Well, my view on it is if something is working for me and accomplishing the goal that it was set out to do, I don't necessarily need the next generation of that. Do I? Or do
No,
you?
I agree. I don't think you need the next generation, but I think it's the maintaining a competitive edge and staying ahead of the curve, because things can change so quickly that technology can be duplicated, modified, and enhanced so quickly that if you don't have an eye on the ball and know what is coming up from behind or from the side, can be
Kodak.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are us.
Right.
So,
right.
So when you're looking at change and you're trying to keep up with change, within your respective industries, is it best to, where do you find out about that change that you need to consider as being part of it? Are you looking within trade organizations? Are you looking within other organizations, other industries?
Great question. I think that from my perspective, I try to surround myself with other entrepreneurs that are in this particular space. I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, there was just a real slowdown in the search business, and it was real. Nobody could put their fingers on it. And so I put together a team of 6 other executive search people, firms, small firms, medium-sized firms that came from different disciplines. So one from the advertising industry, one from IT, and we all got together and tried to study and analyze the data that we had. And because everybody had seen the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so I coupled that with the same question that I ask every HR executive, which is when is there going to be a technology or a device or information that is going to replace executive search? And the answer is always, it will never go away. It's like real estate. They won't use executive search for every role, but in many cases they can't find the right people and they need help.
So are you saying that real estate is safe, that there'll always be a job for those of us in that industry?
I think that's a good assumption.
I'm 55. I need another few years.
That's right. I'm right with you.
I'm working to disrupt you tomorrow. I got a plan.
Oh, do you?
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
For me, it's both, Bob.
You work in both
want
areas?
people outside the industry. In fact, some of our biggest innovations have come from what I've learned from people in totally different spaces and how they're watching how they're deploying and leveraging technology. And hey, totally different business model, but if I take X, Y, and Z and switch it this way, we can deliver more value to our clients. So there's that component. But also you got to keep an eye on what's coming up from within the industry, because there are specific things that are making internal processes more efficient.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I'm always very interested in what other people in other industries are doing for a variety of things, not just technology, but also marketing. I had lunch yesterday with an architect, has his own company. Andy Jones that was a guest on our show.
Mm-hmm.
So we had lunch yesterday, and we were talking about, what is your marketing plan? He said the 11 things. I was like, all right, what 11 things are we talking about? Well, he said, well, it's our 11 things. And so he kind of went. He didn't give me all 11, but he gave me a few of them. And so I'm always interested in how people are doing that. And what's interesting in the real estate business is that residential realtors are more technologically advanced than commercial.
Mm-hmm.
In commercial, for example, I'm hard pressed to find a landlord that will allow us to use digital signatures on a lease. They still want us to print it out, sign it in blue, give them 4 copies.
Interesting.
It's just so pedantic, it's insane. And yet in residential, they're a lot more advanced. And part of the reason for that is not because they're necessarily any smarter or anything else. It's because the developers of technology know that they're having to develop for the individual realtor and not for a big company. So in commercial real estate, they try to sell to the big companies, but in residential, they try to sell to the individual realtor. And so there's a much bigger market at a much lower price point available to the masses of the residential realtors than there is in commercial. And therefore, that's, I think, I don't have any proof of this, but that's my theory as to why technology is going faster in the residential.
And I wonder, too, if it's a mindset thing, too. But because of the volume, it causes people to think differently about it, period, right? And then the age of the investors can be different, too, of people that are buying homes. You're going to have a more diversity in age there versus there's more and more young people buying office buildings, I'm sure. But I'm just saying that if you look at the distribution, I wonder if that, and to me, that's a perfect segue into your business, because I wonder how much of that is a capability. An executive that is always aware of what's going on in technology, like that's got to be a capability that companies are now screening for, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's it used to be a plus, but now it's mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
But that's at all levels of the organization. Technology is critical.
So let's go back before the executive search. And what was the first business you ever got into, even as a kid?
Well, when I was 14 years old, I had a paper route. So I started at a really young age, and I came from a very modest family upbringing in the Midwest, Michigan, and just always wanted to have my own money. So I had a paper route when I was 14 years old, and when I was 15, I was a busboy at Bill Knapp's, and then when I was 17 or 16, I think I started flipping burgers at McDonald's.
I was a busboy once.
Okay.
That was a horrible job, wasn't it?
It was.
I never want to do that again.
It was horrible, but the food was good. I got 2 meals every shift.
I was at IHOP.
Okay. Well, Bill Knapp's was just a step above that. It wasn't a whole lot better. Once a month, I think we got lobster. But
wow.
No, it was it just taught me the basics. And I think that's been the foundation of my my ability to be successful in all levels of business.
So did your parents tell you needed to go get a job, or was it just that you weren't satisfied with whatever allowance or whatever?
No, I was the youngest of the family, and I wanted my own money. I hated asking my father for money, so I always went to my mother. And I know that my mother hated asking my father, so it just got to be a vicious cycle. So instead, I just said, screw it, I'm going to take this under my own control.
So was Dad just a hard ass, or what?
He was,
you
but
don't have to answer that.
He was a little bit, absolutely. But, he grew up that way, and he instilled those values in us as well. So
important values.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did you get into the business that you're in now?
Well, I had been in corporate America for 30 plus years, big companies, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, 7-Up, AT&T, doing sales, marketing, operations, So I had a really exciting career. I was in corporate America. I left AT&T, excuse me, and went to work for a startup technology. I was the fifth guy in the team. It was the name of the product was Webley.
Mm-hmm.
It was out of Chicago. It was an interactive, unified communications product.
Okay.
We were so far ahead of ourselves. It wasn't funny. I mean, the technology was so far advanced, and it brings tears to my eyes because what we were doing 20 years ago is really now just becoming, a feature that you as a consumer see today.
Wow.
But it was significant technology. And to be on the cutting edge in something that fun, we raised about $78 million.
Mm-hmm.
I got a $68 million contract from WorldCom, which was very, very exciting. And then a month later, they went down the tubes.
Well, they didn't pay you in stock.
Absolutely.
So it was like 2000 or so?
It was. Yeah, exactly. And right around 2001.
So the perfectly wrong timing.
Perfectly wrong time for all the wrong reasons. But we went through a hostile takeover, and that was very unfortunate because the technology was flushed from that perspective. But I've always been an entrepreneur. At a young age, I helped my father. He owned a printing company, turn into part of the store into a shipping store because he had great storefront, great frontage on a very busy street in Holt, Michigan. So I just always have been an entrepreneur. I've taught my kids to be that way, to think that way. And I was at a company here in Dallas called Intervoice, running the North America sales organization. And my boss called me on the 4th of July and said that she said it was a new boss. My old boss had left the organization. And she said, "You don't need to come home from vacation. I've eliminated your job. When you get back, go ahead and negotiate your severance with HR."
Oh, have a nice vacation.
Right. So I made one phone call to a friend of mine that was in the search business and just let him know that I was on the beat or on the bench again. So, or on the beach, preferably, right? And so he said, "Kurt, you'd be so good at executive search. Why don't you come up to Galena, Illinois, and take a look at my business? I want you to come up and take."
And you were in the
over."
Dallas area at the time?
I was at the time, yeah. And I had a son that was a senior in high school and a daughter that was a freshman in high school. And I'd commuted to Chicago for 4 years previously, and that just wasn't going to be a good thing again. So I came home and started interviewing executive search firms about the potential of joining the organization. And that was 11 years ago, and today we're, killing it.
Well, great. All right, we're going to take a break. You're listening to The Next Level on 1190 Talk Radio. Hi, this is Bob Gibbons with Riata Commercial Realty. If your office lease is going to be expiring in the next year or two, the one thing I would tell you definitely do not want to do is exercise a renewal option. Now, that may sound a little nuts when you negotiate for that renewal option. Why wouldn't you actually want to use it? Well, the reason is because while you want to have one as a reservation for your space so the landlord can't lease the space out from under you, that option may not actually work the way you want it to now. It may have made sense 5 years ago, but it doesn't today. The only thing that changes when you exercise a renewal option are the expiration date and the rent. But you may want to do other things like have another option to renew, have an option to terminate or expand. You may want to be able to expand now or have a new base year for your operating expenses. There's all kinds of things that need to be considered. So we recommend that you renegotiate, not renew. For more information, contact me, Bob Gibbons, at texastenantrep.com. That's texastenantrep.com. Welcome back. This is The Next Level, and we're here with Kurt VandeMotter of Linked Executive Search, and you can find them online at linkedexec.com.
Or on the line.
On the line.
So your friend says, "Hey, you'd be great." You go up there and check it out.
Right.
And then you
What was there to check out?
Yeah.
Well, it was a question of whether or not I wanted to relocate my family up to Galena, Illinois.
Okay, so he's offering you basically a
to take
role
over
in
his
the business.
Yeah, to take over the business.
Oh, because he wanted to
go do something else.
Okay.
Oh.
And so Galena is a population of about 5,000 in the summer and 500 in the winter.
Ooh.
a lot of the kids drive
seasonal jobs.
Very seasonal. Yeah, right. Well, they worked all over the world, so it was
Sure.
it was really just a franchise that he had bought into, and that was the geographic area. But he could search out of anywhere. So he had a thriving business. It was a good business. So I spent 3 days there to learn what they were doing and learn what was working, what wasn't, whether or not I could see myself as a fit within their organization. And then I decided the sacrifice of leaving Dallas again and leaving my family was too great, and it was time to be doing something in Dallas. And so that's when I started interviewing all these search firms to talk to them about the potential of either joining their organization or starting my own, and could they see me doing that. And just about everybody said, you'll fail if you try to do it yourself, but yeah, I can see you doing this work. Why don't you consider coming over here? So I had a lot of job offers, but not a lot of incentive to compete against them. And so in 2007, again, and not a real good time to start a business or start an executive search business, because there was a lot more laying off than there was hiring.
Yeah, you're like batting 1,000 here.
That's right. We launched the company, and look at 10 years now.
Yeah.
So what was the rationale of these people saying that you're going to fail if you do it on your own, but if you come with us? Is that, I mean, it wasn't like they were just going to hand you clients, were they?
No, they weren't going to hand anybody any clients. I think that their thoughts were to do it yourself. You don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the experience, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the things that it takes. But in retrospect, I had more than what it took, because I had been a hiring manager and hired and fired, and had been a part of succession planning for over 30 years. So I had a connection with hiring managers that other recruiters that had been recruiters their whole life didn't have.
Sure.
And that was a major point of differentiation.
There's a big difference when you understand your client's needs versus just sort of getting it taught to you. Like having walked in those shoes is different than being someone just telling you what their experience is.
This is what you're supposed to do.
One thing I'm kind of curious about is that time you spent in your friend's business, and I mean, were there any takeaways that that came into your business that helped you get off to a quicker start?
Not really. They were we're a retained search organization, so we work in exclusive. They were a contingent firm, so they were juggling a lot of balls and trying to jam a lot of candidates down companies' throats, because in a contingent firm you don't get paid unless you place the candidate. So there's a real fire drill that's going on.
So give us a little more, flesh out those differences between those two a little
Excellent.
bit further.
Especially for maybe someone that's listening who's never
never
Sure.
been involved
Use
in
your
that.
Good.
services.
Good. So contingent search firms work in a non-exclusive fashion. And a hiring manager might have a vice president of sales job open, as an example, and he might or she might give that to 4 different recruiters that they're looking to fill this position. And if you've got candidates that are a good fit, then we'd like to see those candidates. So you've got a race to the finish line. You've got 4 recruiters that haven't been paid anything that are now moving very quickly to try to get candidates into this organization. So there's not a lot of vetting. There's not a lot of one-on-one action. There's not a lot of communication. And it's really just a race to the finish line, because that's how the contingent search firm gets paid.
And that goes always super well for the company.
Well, exactly.
The hiring company?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they get a lot of resumes, but they have to do a lot of the vetting themselves,
Of course.
because the search firm typically hasn't had a lot of conversation with the candidate. On the retained search side, it's an exclusive relationship with the customer, the company, and the executive search, and so there's nobody else competing against that work. So not that you can slow down, because when a company decides that they're going to engage in a retained search, they're equally as motivated to get the job filled. So it's not that you have more time, but now you know that you're not competing against anybody else, and that's good for the company in most cases, because the search is done in a confidential fashion, and so you're not just posting and praying that you get the right candidate. So it's there's a lot of time to get to know the organization and what kind of candidate the organization is looking for. So companies engage in both. They're both very, very popular. And retained search is popular at all levels of the organization. Typically, it's more favorable at the C-suite level, and less down the line. But small organizations that have a director of sales position to fill is equally as important to that organization as an AT&T that's looking for a C-level executive.
So what's an engagement look like, right? So when does someone know they need your services? I mean, obviously having a role open, and then you said you get to know the client more. Like, what does that process look like?
Right. So we specialize in hard-to-fill jobs. I think that any organization gets to a point when they have utilized all the resources that they have. They might have an employee referral program. They've posted the position themselves. Or, Stephen, it can be a confidential search. So the CEO knows that he's going to replace his CFO, and he doesn't want anybody in the organization to know. So HR might not even know. And so then it becomes a very confidential search that we're going to replace this executive, and we want you to conduct the search confidentially. Or it can be just a hard-to-fill job like a Mexican cheesemaker in Omaha, Nebraska. I didn't need a Hispanic person, but I needed somebody that had Mexican recipes.
Wait a minute, that's not real.
Truly is.
What?
Oh my, that is hilarious.
What about a radio show co-host? Is there a?
Bob, are you retired?
No, he found out that I've been looking.
Now I know why you're here.
So whenever you're looking for those really exclusive, niche things, I mean, are you industry specific?
No.
Doesn't sound like it if you're doing Mexican cheesemakers.
Well, what do you think here? This is our niche. We're exploiting the heck out of this Mexican cheesemaker.
In 2007, if I had started the business as a sales expert or a marketing expert or a consumer packaged goods expert, I would have starved. And so that's why the mantra of helping companies fill hard-to-fill jobs was selected. So we work in all levels. But hard-to-fill jobs can also be, I'm working with a family-owned business in the middle of Illinois, population 40. The closest big town is 40 minutes away, and we're looking for a controller for this family-owned business. It's about a $15 million business. So another very difficult job to fill, not because it's the location, but the location adds to the fact that it's a family-owned business, and families have different dynamics as well. So there can be a lot of different reasons that organizations hit the wall and decide to make a call.
Now, I would think that from the hiring company's perspective, when they're trying to decide between retained search and contingency, is a lot of their decision in those two. I mean, you mentioned confidentiality, so that would certainly be one big issue that they would reason why they would go one way or the other. But would the other be, I'm just not confident if I hire a retained search person, that's only one person. They can't know everybody in the world that could be prospective candidates. So I'm going to blanket the whole industry with all these search guys, and I have a better shot of finding somebody.
That's
even
right.
though that increases my workload.
Well, and there is a little bit of that, but the fact is that with the work that we do, we completely vet and work very closely with the candidates and the companies to completely understand exactly what they're looking for. So not only to meet the immediate needs of that position, but Stephen brought up earlier the whole category about being knowledgeable about technology as an example. So a retained search, and not the contingent folks don't do this work as well, but what we do is we think outside the box. And so they're getting a consultant. They're getting a lot more than just somebody to fill the job, because we help that organization think outside the box to identify potential candidates from maybe different industries that could be very successful in this particular organization. So it's a very collaborative but a very consultative, a lot of communication between myself and the hiring manager of the company that we're working with. But recently worked with a law firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the owner had the same feeling, was you're in Dallas, we're in Charlotte. How can you be successful in my market? You've not done a lot in the personal injury space, and so how will you be successful in my industry? And, it really is, you can sell and talk about stories of what we've done and how we do it, but afterwards he was just blown away by the number of candidates and the quality of candidates that we were able to find and bring forward he's extremely satisfied.
Now, would your ability to have done that 20 years ago, before the internet and before LinkedIn and all that, would that have been a different story?
Might have been, absolutely. I take back to when I was at Pepsi-Co years and years ago before we had the internet and everything was done via just a desk phone. And I'd get a phone call from a recruiter that would say, you know, we've got Campbell Soup is looking for a new division manager. Is that something you'd be interested in? And they would build you could see them building kind of that chart where it was a family tree. And they'd write down Kurt, and Kurt would give them 3 names. So they'd call Bob, and Bob would give them 3 names. They'd call Steven, Steven give them 3 names, and then that change just continues. What we do today is essentially the same thing, because we don't expect that we're going to find the right candidate on LinkedIn, but it's maybe through a candidate that isn't as interested that they introduce us to somebody that we would have never found. And so it's still the networking game that it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it will never change.
You just have different tools.
That's
I
right.
get calls all the time from recruiters who see my history on LinkedIn, and they say, "Oh, an asset manager, I need somebody to do that," and they call me up, but they don't ask me if I'm interested. They just say, "Do you know anybody that's interested?" And that makes sense. We're gonna have to take a break. We'll be right back on 1190 a.m.
Stick around.
Hi, my name is Fern, and I've been an empowered team member at Alkali for over 5 years. I first learned about Alkali through an online job board and was intrigued to learn that Alkali was a Dave Ramsey endorsed local provider. But what captivated me was Alkali's mission statement, which is closely aligned with my own beliefs. So what's kept me at Alkali for over 5 years? First, Alkali's 5 core values match my own. Second, I've been empowered to use my unique abilities to impact our community, our clients, and Alkali. If you'd like to learn more about becoming an empowered Alkali team member, visit our website, alkaliservices.com. That's ALKALI services.com.
We're back with Kurt VandeMotter, linked, and you can find him at linkedexec.com.
So, Kurt, we've had a lot of guests on this show, and they're all people that have started businesses, grown businesses.
Many guests.
Almost 150 and so far. And one of the things that we always ask them is, you know, what are the biggest challenges in their business? And the answer we get most commonly is hiring the right people. So, obviously, unemployment's really low right now. So, how do you do your job effectively in such a low unemployment condition?
Good question. So you're absolutely right. I mean, the war on talent right now is harder than it's ever been before. Some of the numbers might be a little misleading, but let's not get into that. The real question is and it's absolutely true. Every executive, we recently did a survey about 15,000 executives, and 80% of them said that hiring the right people is their biggest challenge. Mm-hmm. So there's absolutely no question. What is interesting behind that is that there's more information out there about these companies as well, and so it can be their own reputation that makes it hard to fill the jobs. Okay, or it could just be the industry they're in. Here in Dallas, one of the industries that we've worked in is with Trinity Industries. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well-known company, very successful, but one of the categories, and we don't work with them on this particular category, but we've brainstormed with them, is to find welders, okay? Because of what they do, they need welders. Mm-hmm. And welders are in very high demand because those are technical skills that aren't being taught anymore.
Yep.
So,
Sadly.
you know, it's not just the C-suite. It can be, data analysts. It can be just good digital marketing people. So the war on talent is very real. The unemployment rate is the lowest it's ever been. What do is we help companies build talent pipelines. Okay, and that's really what it's about. It's not to it's getting employees or candidates engaged in a conversation. Okay, and recognizing that people are talent. They're not employees. They're not bodies. They are talent. Mm-hmm. And so spending a lot of time to not just jam a square peg into a round hole, but to take the time that it requires to find the right person for the right organization. And that is helpful for a company that doesn't do what we do every day, because we can vet and we can ask a lot of those questions. We can get really involved in trying to help find the candidate that is the right fit. And fit is the hardest thing to fill within an organization. We can identify skills, but fit is the most difficult, and it's the biggest challenge. But as we get to know a company and what their challenges are and who their customers are and so forth, we can get even into the fit category. But when then they get into the office and interview with the CEO, many times the CEO spends the whole hour trying to sell his company because they don't know how to ask the right questions. And that can be really, really frustrating because they're hiring not even based on instincts, but they're hiring on likability. And we just, you know, in a low talent war that we're in right now, you can't hire like that because those employees won't be there for very long.
So Bob was laughing because as we've learned over the years, we made a few mistakes early on with our hiring as we were growing and learning, and one of the things that we eventually identified was that the biggest problem was the guy I shave in the mirror with every year, because I tend to like everybody, and I'm excited about what we do and the why we do it and everything else, and so our team said in a very nice way that you can't tell where your passion ends and the candidate's begins. And so what's really funny is we removed me from the hiring process because I was a big part of why we were misfiring on it, because I'd be like, oh, they're great, they're excited. And some of the more discerning people on our team were like, no, they weren't. I mean, they were dead. You know, they were just sitting there. And so we have dramatically improved our results by actually pulling me out of the equation until basically, I mean, kind of funny is now I meet candidates that as we're making them an offer, and sometimes they're nervous because they're meeting me, right? And it's like, but they don't realize, like, if I'm showing up, the job's almost a guarantee
you're
getting
the easiest
offered,
mark
right?
in the place.
Yeah.
All right. So, what are the biggest mistakes that companies make when they're trying to hire?
Well, they don't look at enough candidates, and if they're doing the hire themselves, they don't take the time to look at enough candidates, so their pool of candidates is too small. They don't use behavioral interviewing skills to interview the candidates to really learn about what the candidate's done in the past that's going to contribute to the candidate's future success within the organization.
So give us an example of some behavioral questions, because I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So a behavioral question might be tell me a time that you were working in a team in an organization in a team environment where there was somebody on the team that you didn't really get along with, but you had to succeed. What was that experience like? Another behavioral question would be, tell me a time that you had to overcome a really difficult objection with a client, and how did you win that client, and what was the outcome?
And what is it like from your perspective, right? Just sharing wisdom here. What's your perspective when I've never had that, or I get along with everybody, right?
My biggest weakness is I care too much.
Right. Well,
because I think that's a lot of where the training and coaching comes in for the hiring managers, right? Because there are certain people that will, okay, well, yeah, that's great. They've never had a conflict.
Right. Well,
I think it's a red flag.
And that's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody that can't say, that has not ever made a mistake, that is one of the biggest red flags out there. We've all made mistakes. It's just picking the one that is most apropos for that particular situation, right?
Yeah, I just finished reading a biography of Elon Musk. And so at SpaceX and Tesla and Solar City, their interviewing process is really trying to not ask answerable questions. So they ask questions that really don't have a clear answer or even a right answer necessarily. But the point is not to get the answer. The point is to find out how do you think.
That's right.
And how would you approach the problem. And so that's really what they're looking for. And of course, they're mainly they hire a ton of engineers. So that's really important in an engineering situation, but it's really important in every other situation as well, because we all are asking our employees to be in a situation to solve some problem, to do something that we don't have time to do, et cetera. So we need to know, we want to empower them to do things that we're not able to do every day.
Absolutely. And that type of interviewing is very unique. And it's really the cutting edge companies that are training their executives and everybody in the organization to ask those questions, and then to be able to interpret the results or the answers as well, so that it makes sense.
Are you, as an a retained search person, hired by some other company, XYZ Companies hires you? Are you bound by all the same laws associated with what you can and can't ask? Or is that something that you have more latitude and more freedom with?
Great question. So, Bob, typically we would get those questions out of the way with the company first, if there was something that was, that would be considered very sensitive. Okay, one might be is do you perceive? It could be as simple as, do you perceive a female or a male in this role? For whatever reason. I mean, I know that sounds really illegal, but I can ask the company that, because it's not applicable to all situations, but there are some situations where it's a family-owned business, and for some reason, they feel like one or the other might be more successful. I can ask the company those questions, but I abide by the same laws that the company abides by, and the rules and the regulations and the laws.
So if you were asking questions that were deemed to be illegal, are you pregnant, what's your race, what's your gender, all this kind of thing, that would be illegal for you to ask, and would that liability then also be traceable back to the...
It wouldn't transfer to the company, but it would be a direct reflection of the company. And so that's what, as a retained search executive, I am an arm, I'm an extension of that company. Mm-hmm. I am working for that company, and my job is, as I talked about earlier, the CEO tries to sell the organization. My job is to sell the candidate about the opportunity in the company before they get into the interview, so that the CEO can spend time to figure out whether or not that person's going to be a great addition to the team. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to there may be some search firms and people that do that, but those, I've been trained by all the biggest and the best companies, and those questions are completely off limits. Completely off limits.
It's good to hear. So what do you see as far as other tools, assessment tools or psychological tools or whatever that are used consistently in your business?
So I'm a huge believer of assessments and different testing tools, depending on the industry, depending on the position that's being filled. But one of the requirements is that the organization's got to be using those same tools. So it's unfair, and it's not, the results are very difficult to interpret if you ask every candidate to take a zero-risk assessment, for instance, when you haven't given that zero-risk assessment to everybody in the organization. Mm-hmm. Because I can't plot the results from the candidate against your organization when I don't have any other data to compare it to. Mm. So I am a big believer of those tools, and I think that they can be very directional and very helpful, and I've seen it work in many times. But in general, if a company is not utilizing those tools, then that's not a tool that I would inherently bring to the organization and suggest for them.
Interesting. I interviewed for a VP of real estate job for a hospital chain one time, and this thing went on for 6 months, and I was the last guy standing. But they'd actually put a few of us through the psychological testing. I mean, sitting down with a psychologist, putting together the ink blocks and all kinds of blocks and ink block tests and everything else. And at the end of the day, I didn't get the job because they said, "You're a procrastinator." I said, "Well, I could have told you that from the beginning. If you just asked me
why didn't you ask me that?"
Well, we got to take a quick break. We'll be back on 1190 in a minute.
Stick around.
My name is Tommy O'Donnell, founders of Crazy Ventures, which is all about being free to be yourself. I usually don't suggest people pretend to be someone else, but the world isn't ready for the real Bob and Steven.
We're back with Kurt VandeMotter, linkedexec.com.
So, Kurt, when you started this, you said that you really, while you had been a hiring guy throughout your career, you'd never been an executive search person, and you decided not to go with the established firms already. So how did you market yourself? How did you get started? I mean, how long did that take? It seems like you must have been starving for a while.
So it took about 5 months before we started to see any revenue. The executive search business is a very personal business. It's a very one-on-one. And so there's really, we use all the social tools that are available today to keep our companies or keep companies and potential customers up to date of what we're doing. But in 10 years, I've never gotten a call from anybody that says, hey, I found you on LinkedIn or I found you on the internet. We'd like you to help us fill this job. 98% of our business comes from referrals. And so the first 5 months was literally every day, 6 or 7 networking meetings with hiring people to talk to them about what we were doing and how we were going to do the business. And it's just 101 blocking and tackling, selling 101 guerrilla, exactly.
So you're calling them on the phone nonstop and then setting an appointment.
Going to have lunch.
And why do they want to see you? I mean, they got to be hit on by people like you.
Well,
all
and
the
that's
time.
the unfortunate thing they do. So they were taking the calls because of the personal relationships that we had. And then we were
you
trying
already
to
knew these people.
Correct. So we were then trying to convert those into opportunities. And it was a friend of ours that we'd had a relationship with a previous life that said, we are expanding here. We need 6 jobs filled. If you'll consider this model versus your model. And it wasn't a huge change. It was a very small tweak to the model. We said, absolutely. And after we had filled probably about 15 jobs there, we met with that VP of HR again, and he said, it's time to review your model, and it's time for you to raise your rates. You've completely exceeded our expectations.
Wow.
So then we started to leverage that information with other customers to talk about what we could do, how we could help them solve their problems, and then asking that executive to introduce us to some of the people that he knew as well. And it just grew exponentially from that point forward.
Wow.
And has your marketing plan changed since then?
Not a lot. It's it continues to be a lot of one-on-one, just guerrilla marketing and meeting with people. And everybody thinks that when you're a search executive, oh, I've got a great introduction for you. My neighbor just became unemployed.
Yeah, no.
Well, I know where to find those guys. I don't need those introductions, but I do need the introductions to companies that are hiring that would consider using an outside search firm.
Yeah, I mean, people, when they find out I'm in commercial real estate, they want to introduce me to somebody they know in commercial real estate, a leasing agent, a landlord or whatever. I'm like, I don't need to know them. I probably already know them, and if I don't, I know how to find them.
That's right.
I need to know the company that needs to lease the space or buy the building. So
exactly.
It's kind of funny that, but it's all about association, right? So somebody associates you with executive search, so they want to introduce you to hiring managers or other executive search people or a candidate who's unemployed. They don't necessarily give you what you really need because they don't think about that.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have that problem all the time.
Trying to figure out what I need.
I want to meet the insurance company execs. I want to meet. Just kidding.
All right. So in our pre-interview material, we ask you a question, and what are you most excited about right now? And you said something that was totally a tease, something I'm about to launch soon.
Right.
So come on. So what is that about?
Yeah. So it's very similar to what we do today, but it's a category that's not as well known about. I mean, it's been there forever. It's called outplacement. So many companies, there's big companies that do it, the Lee Heck Harrisons of the world, and they do a very, very good job of it, by the way. But they typically work with the larger clients, the big AT&Ts, the Toyotas of the world that are scheduled to have layoffs of some sort. And so the work that we do in executive search is very similar to outplacement because it's just reverse engineering that to help candidates figure out what their roadmap is for reemployment. And so it's really interesting. You would consider it maybe a conflict. We're talking to companies that we're hiring people for, and then we're offering them the service that when they fire those people, that they have an outplacement option to come with us.
Sounds like the circle of life to me.
It is a circle of life, and it truly is. And I fought about it. I fought myself over this for a long time and whether or not there was a conflict. And now after talking to a number of executives, we've decided to go ahead and launch it. But it's interesting because there's a lot of companies that don't even know what outplacement is. The value of outplacement really, most people would think it's the value to the employee because they've just been let go. And so now you're giving them, a resource to work with. But the real value in surveys and information about outplacement is the real value is to the employees that are being left behind, that are there still working for the company. They feel good that Jack, who they've worked with for 12 years, that's now being outplaced, is being given some resources to help him find a job quickly. And so it's really not as much for the employee as it is for the rest of the organization that's left there behind after somebody is let go.
So out of curiosity, like, where was the battle in your mind then? Because to me that sounds pretty clear cut.
Well, because again, it's that whole mantra of you're hiring people for me, but now when we fire people, you want to take care of them as well. And I was stuck on the thought of, I placed Jackie, and a year later, Jackie's not working out, and now you got to fire Jackie, and so I'm going to make more money on you or more money from your organization because I'm going to help Jackie find a job. But that doesn't happen. I mean, that's the likelihood of that is very small. Not because Jackie's never going to get fired, but it's the transition is just, it's not there.
Sure.
So does this all happen within Linked Executive Search, or does that you're not creating a separate entity to do that part?
No, not going to create a separate entity, just a subcategory, and go talk and start presenting to the same executives that we've worked with for the last 10 years about the opportunity to work with them when they have some of these people that they want to offer that service to.
I think that's a pretty significant difference in the model of not so much who you're getting the business from, but how you execute the business. Because right now, an executive search business isn't very people intensive, but outplacement, I would assume, is much more people intensive. Is that accurate or not?
Describe or define people intensive.
Meaning you're going to have a lot more employees on your staff to handle the volume. I mean, if somebody's going to lay off 40 people, 400 people, whatever, that's going to take a lot more people.
So that's not going to be in the secret. That's not going to be in the sweet spot as far as where we're looking. We're looking for the companies that are letting go 4 or 5 people a year.
Okay.
So we're not
very low
going to target,
volume.
right? Because we can't compete with the Lehigh Harrisons and the large organizations that are going after the big firms. And they've got the relationships, and they've done it for a long time. They've got offices nationally. So the sweet spot is for the smaller organizations that want to have that.
And define smaller, because we've been talking around this, but just because everyone has a
10 to 100 million
Okay.
company that maybe has 80 employees.
Okay.
So that's your ideal client.
Right.
And industry doesn't matter.
Industry.
Geography doesn't matter.
No. Geography doesn't matter, but in this particular case, we're going to launch it here in Dallas first because there's plenty of business from that perspective right here.
Sure.
And then as we grow and start offering in other cities, then that's where the headcount will come into play. But the fact is the model, the one-on-one with the candidate and the counselor is really limited. I mean, in a 1 month period, they may have 4 hours of conversation. And so one counselor can have quite a workload as far as the number of people that they're administering and working with.
Right.
And then it depends on the candidate's engagement as well. Because if the candidate's not willing to and not interested in engaging and taking that advice, then it's game over. Then it's
Sure. I mean, vicious cycle, right? Self-fulfilling prophecy. So we got a couple of minutes left. I mean, obviously, most of our listeners are business owners, entrepreneurs, but for the person out there that's searching, what are a few takeaways that they can take from the show that would maybe help them find their right next move?
good. So finding a job is a full-time job. It's the hardest job that anybody will ever have, and so I highly recommend that 90% of the jobs that are filled through people's network. And so if you're sitting at home and you're working online and you're looking at Yahoo Jobs and LinkedIn, you're wasting your time. You've got to get out and meet people. You've got to take appointments. You've got to get out into the world and sit at Starbucks and talk to people. You've got to leverage your network. So you've got to let your network know that you're unemployed and that you're looking for new opportunities. It's not a bad thing to be unemployed anymore. It happens to everybody, and it's not a bad thing. And then I think it's just some of the basics as far as updating your LinkedIn profile to make sure that it reflects all of the things that you've done, that it includes 50 key words of how I would find you if I was a search executive and I was looking for your skills. How would I find you? And those are through keywords. It's putting your personal contact information into LinkedIn so that when I do find you and click on your profile, then I can call you directly.
With LinkedIn, is the resume dead?
No. The LinkedIn is just the beginning. It's just, I can look at 100 profiles in 30 minutes on LinkedIn, but it's the engagement, and then the resume is absolutely required. Absolutely required. And that's one of the important tools as well, is to make sure you've got a good, up-to-date resume. Seek advice. You don't have to pay to have it written, but find somebody that can look at it and critique it.
Yes, with typos removed.
Correct.
And grammar errors. I'm blown away at the lack of professionalism you see sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, and people are filling out their resumes kind of like they text.
And resumes today can be modified. So back in the day, my father owned a printing company, I told you. And when I graduated from college, he typeset my resume. Okay. And nobody typesetted the resume. My dad was so excited that I had graduated from college. He had this, capability, and they typeset my resume. Well, once that was done, you couldn't make a change to your resume. You print 100 copies, it's done. So today, candidates can review and change their resumes based on the requirements of the job, and they need to do so.
Every single time they do an interview. Well, thanks so much for being our guest today, Kurt. We really enjoyed it. For our listeners, please go to linkedexec.com to learn more. Please go to our website, nextlevelshow.com, to learn more about our show, or find us on podcast at The Next Level Show.
Help spread the word and have a great week.
Bye.